What's one moment in your life that changed everything in your family?
My mom set a bowl of soup in front of me and called it a peace offering, the kind of careful phrase she uses when she wants to smooth over something she doesn't plan to admit to. And as the steam rose between us and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear like she was in a commercial for being thoughtful, I realized that I wasn't even angry in the way I used to be. Because the sting of being left out had moved past anger into that flat space where you finally understand the rules of your own family and accept that they never really included you unless you were useful, and it hit me that this bowl wasn't about peace at all. It was about controlling the story before I could tell it myself. I didn't find out about the family trip from her, of course I didn't, because in my family people don't tell you hard things, they curate them, and I saw the photos later, the matching grins and the "Just Us" caption and the spa wristbands peeking into frame, and I knew without asking who had picked the destination and who had carried the day's decisions like a crown, because it is always my sister Emily, always the favorite, always the one whose stress needs tending and whose victories need parades, while mine are treated like errands that accidentally went well. My phone lit up that night with a text from Mom that said she wished I had been there in spirit, and I stared at that line for too long because it sounded like a memorial and not a message, and when she followed it up with the invite for dinner, the careful I made soup. Your favorite, let's talk. I heard what she wasn't saying, which was I need this to be over so we can pretend I did my best, and I agreed to come because I wanted to look her in the eyes and see which story she was planning to hand me. I walked in and saw that she had set 3 places, which she does when she wants the room to feel like a vote she knows she'll win, because if it's the 2 of them and me then the math does itself, and sure enough Emily was already there with that relaxed, pampered look you get from hot stones and other people paying for your comfort, and she gave me a small smile like a politician at a ribbon cutting, the kind of smile that pretends to be warm while counting points under the table. Mom started with the soft voice she uses for delicate things, explaining that the trip came together last minute and that she assumed I would be busy, which is funny because she rarely asks what I'm busy with. And when I let that sit for a second, she pivoted into the greatest hits about how families go through seasons and how sometimes logistics get messy. And I listened because I have learned that when you let someone talk long enough, they eventually land on what they truly mean, which, in her case, is usually that Emily needed it more, that Emily was under pressure, that Emily had been exhausted and deserved a break, as if that somehow cancels the simple fact that they booked, packed, and left without me and then posted about it like they were proud of the empty chair. She placed the soup in front of me and waited, and I could feel the performance gathering itself like a crowd in my chest. Because I knew that if I took the first spoonful I would be accepting the script in which I am the reasonable eldest daughter who forgives easily and keeps the peace by swallowing it. And I had decided on the drive over that I was done swallowing things that weren't mine, so I looked at the bowl, looked at Emily, and asked whether she wanted it instead since she had been the one who needed nourishment lately, and my tone stayed friendly while my pulse moved to the edge of the table. Emily laughed, because she always laughs first to signal that no one should take anything too seriously, and she said sure and slid the bowl closer and thanked Mom again for the weekend, which was polite to the point of being obnoxious, and Mom said of course, sweetheart, because her mouth knows that line by heart. I watched them shift in their chairs like performers hitting their marks, and for a second I considered walking out without a word, but that would have made me the villain in a story they were already writing in their heads, so I tore a piece of bread and took a slow bite and told them the soup looked great. When Emily lifted the spoon, there was a pause that felt like it belonged to me, because it had taken years to learn that I didn't have to fight loudly to win, that sometimes you can let people argue with their own suspicions while you sit there calm and collected. And I saw Mom glance at me in that quick, involuntary way that betrays where her mind is trying not to go, and I kept my face steady and my voice casual, chatting about work and a neighbor's new dog and anything that sounded like a normal dinner conversation, while a different conversation hummed underneath about trips and spa weekends, and the kind of love that always arrives tied with conditions. Emily said the soup had a little kick, which made Mom perk up with pride and say she had used a new blend, and I nodded like I was impressed because I wanted the scene to look exactly like what it technically was. Three people sharing a meal and tiptoeing around a wound that everyone could smell, but no one wanted to call by name. I knew, as I watched the two of them, that I wasn't going to give them what they wanted, which was a tidy confession about how deeply I felt hurt, followed by the magical sentence where I say I understand, because understanding had never been the issue. Respect had, and respect finally had a seat at the table. Here's what changed inside me without a speech or a threat or a dramatic exit. I stopped asking for a fair vote in a house where I'm always outnumbered, and I started setting terms in ways that don't need an audience. Which is why I smiled and handed the bowl to the woman who never seems to notice when the check skips me, and I let the silence between spoonfuls do more talking than I ever could. Because sometimes the most honest thing you can do is refuse to carry one more apology on your back. Mom asked how my week had been, and I gave her a version that was true without being generous, and she nodded tightly, and Emily told a long story about a facial and a technician with magic hands, which was the kind of detail she thinks proves value. And I made a small joke that landed just hard enough to make her blink, because I was testing the tension on the line and it held. By the time the bowls were nearly empty, I could feel the temperature in the room shift in that small, private way you only notice when you finally stop chasing approval, and I knew I had nudged the balance just enough to be felt, not enough to be named, which is exactly where I wanted it. When Emily put her spoon down and said she suddenly felt a little off, Mom's face flickered through concern and confusion before it stopped on me, and I didn't flinch because I had done nothing anyone could quote, and I reached for another piece of bread and took a slow, thoughtful bite, while Mom stared and Emily pressed her napkin to her mouth and the room went tight around the edges. And that is the moment I realized the old rules were gone, because for the first time, I wasn't the one waiting to see what they would do next. Emily stood up too fast and blamed it on a headache that apparently arrived at the same moment the last spoonful landed, and she gathered her bag with that tight smile people use when they are trying not to show they feel uneasy. While Mom shifted into her caretaker voice and started offering tea and crackers and the same kind of mothering that always shows up when Emily twitches, but somehow never makes the trip when I am the one hurting, and I sat there with my bread and watched the scene reset around me like furniture being moved after guests have already arrived, because the point was never whether the soup did anything at all. The point was how quickly Mom's eyes chose their side and how easily Emily accepted the role of the fragile one who deserves extra cushions. And the realization felt less like a discovery and more like finally reading the label on a jar I have been opening for years. After Emily left with a promise to text later, Mom began to apologize in that general way that somehow manages to apologize to the air more than to an actual person, saying the trip had gotten complicated and the scheduling was crazy and that she never wanted me to feel left out. And I nodded slowly because I have learned that nodding is a better lever than arguing. Then I thanked her for dinner and picked up my bag and, on the way out, I paused just long enough in the hallway to notice the stack of glossy spa brochures tucked under the mail like they were shy, which told me everything I needed to know about how long this peace offering had been staged. Driving home, I did not rehearse speeches or write furious texts because I have done that too many times and it never pays, so instead I thought about leverage, the subtle kind that does not need to raise its voice. And I decided that if they liked stories so much I would simply give them a better one with fewer adjectives and more consequences, which is how I ended up on my couch with my phone, opening the family thread that includes aunts and cousins and a couple of old neighbors who still bring the potato salad to every 4th of July, because that audience is the one that actually regulates behavior in families like mine, where shame arrives wearing a casserole and leaves with an extra Tupperware. I typed slowly so nothing could be clipped out of context, and I wrote that Mom had invited me over with soup, which I appreciated, and that Emily had not been feeling well by the end of the meal, which I hoped was just a quick thing. And then I added a single line whose sweetness made my teeth ache even as I hit send. Next time maybe we can plan something that includes everybody, because I miss being part of the fun. And I placed a heart at the end because a little garnish helps the medicine go down without anyone noticing it as medicine. I did not mention the trip directly. I did not accuse. I did not even label what happened as exclusion. I simply released a truth into a room full of people who like to think of themselves as fair. And then I put the phone face down and went to wash a dish that did not need washing just to remind myself that patience is part of strength. The replies began in that staggered way that teaches you who checks their phone while making dinner and who still believes in silent evenings. And they were exactly the kind of public affection I counted on because I knew no one wants to look like the person who condones leaving someone out. So the aunts chimed in with "We love you," and cousins asked when we were all getting together. And a neighbor wrote that Mom's soup has never agreed with her either and threw in a laughing face I carefully ignored, and the thread rolled on with invitations and suggestions and 3 separate cousins volunteering to host, which meant the story had already shifted from my supposed oversensitivity to a group consensus that inclusion is the default. And that new default had a timestamp, a list of witnesses, and a tone that left very little room for anyone to claim this was my imagination. I did not write to Mom directly because I did not need to. The room was doing the work that my one-on-one conversations never could, and I could feel a part of me cooling down in a way that might even last, which is a relief I rarely trust. In the morning, Mom called with a voice that was trying to be casual and could not quite stick the landing, asking how I was feeling and whether anything had tasted off to me. And I told her the bread was excellent and the soup seemed fine, though maybe a little strong on whatever new blend she had tried, and I let the words hang there until I heard the quiet inhale that arrives when someone has connected a dot they hoped was not there. And then I offered, in the kindest tone I own, to send her the link to a spice shelf life chart I used recently because I had organized my own pantry and discovered a few jars that had been living rent-free since the election before last, which made her laugh a beat too late, and she said she would check her labels and thanked me. And then she mentioned that the family thread had been busy last night and that I had certainly stirred up a lot of interest in getting everyone together, and I said I thought it would be nice since I had missed so much lately. Then I asked how Emily was doing, and Mom said she was resting and that she had texted but not much else, which told me that the 2 of them had already had a conversation that did not arrive at peace. I went to work and behaved like a person whose life is normal, answering emails and declining a meeting that could have been 1 sentence. And around lunch my aunt called the way aunts do when they smell smoke and want to know whether it is a candle or a wildfire. And she asked cheerfully whether everything was okay after last night because Emily had looked off according to Mom, and I said I was totally fine and that Emily mentioned a headache and that it probably was nothing, and then I added that I was just happy to be included at dinner since I had been out of the loop on the recent trip, and I let the phrase recent trip do the heavy lifting, because the usefulness of a soft truth is that people will repeat it while trying to be helpful. And by dinner the loop would be closed and the moral accountants in my family would be sharpening their pencils. My revenge, if you even want to call it that, did not involve a dramatic confession or some smoky declaration about payback. It was a simple realignment of attention, a gentle redirecting of the spotlight to the small, constant ways a person gets sidelined, and the satisfaction I felt was not bitter, it was clean. The kind of clean you get when you finally scrub a stain you had decided to live with and realize it actually comes out if you stop pretending it is not there. By late afternoon, Emily's message arrived, a short note that said she felt better and that she hoped I did not think last night was weird, and I replied that I hoped she was okay and that I was fine. Then I thanked her again for the spa photos because honesty with a straight face is a sharper tool than sarcasm most days, and within minutes Mom texted as well, saying she would love to take me out for coffee this week, just the 2 of us, and that she wanted to clear the air, which is her way of saying she wants to place the pieces back where she likes them, and I said sure because I have no interest in fighting over the table when I can simply rearrange the room. I set the phone down, took a breath I did not realize I had been holding, and felt something click into place that had been loose for years. A simple understanding that the rules only govern you if you keep pretending you did not read them, and right then, as if the universe wanted to audition for the role of obvious metaphor, the call waiting flashed a name I did not expect to see on my screen, the spa's front desk. Returning a message I had sent that morning asking about possible product sensitivities and whether any of their treatments could interact with common pantry ingredients, and I let it ring one more time before I answered. Because sometimes you earn the right to enjoy the pause. The spa manager's voice had that trained calm that comes from answering the same nervous questions 100 times a week, and when I explained that my sister had been in recently and fell off after dinner, she didn't even need me to finish before she started listing the usual aftercare, the simple rules that everyone promises to follow and then breaks the minute they feel fine. The reminders about avoiding heat and saunas and anything that spikes circulation for at least 2 days, the note about skipping wine and strong spices because they can trigger flushing and headaches after certain treatments, and then the gentle warning about active peels and vitamin A and all the serums people smear on themselves to feel like a new person. And I thanked her and asked her to email the general guidance so I could pass it along to my very dramatic family, and she laughed in that polite way that tells you she has a drawer full of this exact email and pressed send while we were still on the phone. Which meant I had something simple and clean to work with that didn't accuse anyone and didn't make me look obsessive. I sat with that email for a minute the way you sit with a good piece of leverage, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because the only thing that has ever moved my family is embarrassment tied to practicality. And I wrote a message in the big family thread that said I had learned something helpful, that there are standard aftercare notes for spa treatments, and that spicy food can be a trigger right after, which probably explained why Emily felt weird at dinner. And then I attached the email with a line about how good it is to have facts, and I hit send and went to make coffee I did not need, because sometimes normal actions keep your hands from shaking when the power shifts toward you for the first time in years. The thread lit up in that popcorn way it always does when people get to be knowledgeable without doing any work, and cousins chimed in about their own reactions to products. And an aunt confessed she once ignored a warning and looked like she had run a marathon after a single glass of red wine, and tucked between all the stories were 2 small sentences that mattered more than anything else. One from my aunt that said we should be more careful about what we serve after treatments, and one from my uncle who wrote that he guessed certain dinners should be planned with everyone's needs in mind, and even though he probably thought he was being neutral, what he really did was put a little sticky note on the memory of that soup. A note that said this had been avoidable and should have been handled differently, and Mom, who reads tone like other people read road signs, responded with a handful of smiley words and a thank you for the information, and she did not say a single thing about the trip, which told me she understood exactly where this road was heading and had decided to drive it without admitting who turned the wheel. I could have left it there and let the low hum of social pressure work on its own, but I wanted something that would rack up inside Emily in a gentler way, not because I owed her kindness, but because I know her. And I know that loud confrontations make her double down while quiet accountability makes her rethink, so I sent her a private text that said I had forwarded the spa email to the family because it seemed useful, and I added that I hoped she was feeling better. Then I told her that if she wanted to go in on a little set of fragrance-free products I had found that are safe after treatments, we could split it and call it a sister pact to avoid accidental flare-ups. And I wrote it with a light tone that made it sound like a practical joke instead of a rope, and she responded with a thumbs up first, and then with words, saying that she appreciated the thought and that she had felt stupid last night and that maybe the soup had been too much after all, and tucked inside that admission was the first honest line I had heard from her in months, which was that she knew her comfort had still been the center of the room even when her body was the one complaining. And I told her it happens and left it at that, because the worst thing you can do to someone who has finally taken one step toward you is shove them the rest of the way. By mid-afternoon, the aunt who loves to play town crier had started a new thread about planning a family dinner that included everyone and took dietary needs into account. And she tagged me in the first line and wrote that maybe I could help host since I had been so thoughtful about the information, and the compliment hit me harder than it should have. Not because I need approval from people who only notice I exist when the volume is high, but because the invitation was the exact opposite of the last month, not another echo of a closed door but a basic, decent opening, and I said yes and suggested a date 2 weeks out and a menu that left room for people to bring what they could handle. And in half an hour I had replies from people who have never once replied to my messages, even when they were the only 2 words I needed, and I realized that one measured nudge had been more effective than a year of begging for fairness, which is a sentence I wish I did not have to say out loud. Mom called again, And this time she did not pretend. She went straight to asking whether I had noticed anything odd about the soup, whether I had tasted anything that seemed off, whether I thought she might have made a mistake with a new jar she opened. And the humility in her voice almost got me until I remembered that her humility only visits when another person is watching, and I said the flavor was strong but fine, and that the spa email probably explained everything, and I added that it might be smart to check expiration dates on anything powdered because life gets away from us and pantries are where time goes to hide, and she made that same late laugh and said she would go through her spices tonight. And then she hesitated and asked how I knew Emily had a peel since she hadn't mentioned it at dinner, and I said I didn't know for sure, that I had simply called to ask for general guidance because we were all guessing. And then I asked whether she wanted me to bring dessert to the family dinner or if she preferred I handle the salads, and the way she skipped answering told me she had heard the part where I said we were all guessing and decided to read it as a confession of something else, which suited me fine because ambiguity had become my favorite punctuation mark. In the evening, Emily texted that she had woken up with a blotchy face, and then it calmed down and that she was going to skip makeup for a few days, and then, as if she had been holding it all afternoon, she followed with a question that landed like a small stone in a still bowl, asking whether I had done something to the soup or whether I was just being myself and letting Mom panic. And I stared at that message for longer than I needed, because there was a compliment buried under the accusation. The kind of backhanded respect you get when someone finally realizes you are not the soft target you used to be. And I typed back that I ate the bread and passed the bowl and enjoyed the conversation and went home. Which was the entire truth and also the entire point, and before she could respond my phone lit up with Mom's name again. This time not a call, but a message that read, "We are on our way to urgent care because Emily is having a reaction, and I am telling them everything." And then a follow-up that said, "including the soup," and then, a beat later, the one that mattered. What exactly should I tell them about the timing? And I looked at the screen and felt the room tilt by a degree. And I wrote back, "Tell them she had a treatment and ate spicy food and that she should be fine." Then Mom called instead of replying and asked, in a voice that was more accusation than fear, how I knew about the treatment if no one told me. And I let the question hang there so long it started sounding like an answer all on its own. When Mom finally stopped circling the question and asked it the way she had clearly rehearsed in the car, drawing out each word like she hoped one of them would trap me, wanting to know how I knew about the treatment if Emily had not told me and whether I had touched the soup or said anything to the waiter when she was not looking, I could hear the old choreography waking up in her voice. The part where I am supposed to fill the silence with a confession or, at minimum, a neat explanation that lets her close the lid on the mess and label it misunderstanding, and I surprised both of us by letting that silence stretch until it felt like a fourth person sitting at the table. Because I have learned that if you refuse the role you've always been given, other people have to either pick a new play or admit that they only know how to act when the script is stacked in their favor. I asked her how Emily was, and she said the urgent care doctor had given her a short steroid pack and a lecture about aftercare, and that everything pointed to a reaction mixed with spice and stress, and I said that sounded reasonable and that I was glad the doctor had been clear. Then I told her I would bring a gentle dessert to the family dinner, something everyone could handle, and I watched her realize that I was already talking about the next room while she was still trying to rewind last night. She wanted to meet alone, of course she did, and she picked a coffee shop that has been our unofficial conflict zone for years, the one with a corner table where she can see the door and where she has cried exactly twice and asked me for favors exactly 5 times. Although, to be fair, one of those times was genuine and the others were just dressed up as emergencies, and I walked in late on purpose because I did not feel like making space for her pacing to land inside my chest, and she started right in with the log of what had been said and who had texted and how her sister had called to say that the family thread made her feel embarrassed, and I nodded because embarrassment is a useful teacher when it shows up on time. And Mom leaned forward with that look that used to own me, the one that says she is trying to shield the family from drama and needs me to be the reasonable one, and she asked again whether I had done anything to the soup, and I told her the truth I had been telling. Since the table, that I ate bread and passed the bowl and enjoyed the conversation, and then I added the part she was not ready for, which was that I had grown out of trying to earn my seat by being endlessly forgiving, and that I was not interested in being excluded, and then invited back with something warm poured into a bowl like it could cover everything up. She said she hated that I felt left out and that she had not meant to hurt me, which is a sentence that should come with a return policy because I have seen it handed out like a coupon whenever she wants to reset the scoreboard. And I told her I believed she had not meant to hurt me but that she had certainly meant to prioritize Emily, and that those two things are not opposites, and then I slid my phone across the table and opened the message I had drafted on the way there, the one addressed to the entire family thread with a shared calendar invite for the dinner that my aunt had asked me to co-host, and I told Mom that I had set it up in a way that removes mystery from future plans and that I had created a standing rule that anything labeled family would include everyone by default, and that the invite list was now visible to all, and that the menu and assignments would live in a place where no one could pretend they did not see it, and her face did a quick dance between relief and panic because she heard the offer of order, but she also heard the subtext, which was that her favorite tool, the quiet side chat where decisions get made before the announcement drops, had just been retired without her permission. She said it felt controlling, and I said it felt equitable, and she said she did not like being painted as the villain in front of the cousins, and I said I did not like being the invisible sister in front of the camera, and then, because I am not interested in pretending we are strangers to each other, I told her that I knew about the spa treatment because the spa had posted a photo with their Weekend Glow collage and Emily had reshared it with a caption that might as well have been a signed affidavit, and Mom blinked like I had revealed access to a secret database when all I had done was look at the same internet she thinks does not apply inside our kitchen, and I watched the realization settle in that the old leverage points, silence, private explanations, the fake surprise that appears whenever the truth gets loud, do not hold when the receipts live in the open. I could feel the part of me that used to beg for a softer version of her reaching for the wheel, and I shut it down because I did not come to negotiate, I came to establish, which is not the same thing as war even if it feels like it the first time you do it. So I told her plainly that I was not asking for apologies because apologies from her arrive with strings attached, and I was also not threatening to expose anything because anyone paying half attention could piece the story together from public breadcrumbs, and that what I was doing was simpler and, frankly, kinder, I was making it inconvenient to pretend I did not exist by installing a system that makes exclusion visible, which is what adults call accountability when they are trying to be polite. She said the family would think I was taking over, and I said the family could think whatever they wanted as long as future plans did not require me to guess whether I had been considered, and then I handed her a small envelope I had brought not to provoke her but to anchor the conversation in something that does not disappear when tempers cool. Inside it a printed copy of the spa aftercare email with the sections highlighted that mention spice and circulation and timing, along with a post-it where I had written that I would handle the soup for the next dinner and label it mild so no one had to keep track, and she stared at that paper like it might explain what about me had changed, when the answer was simply that I had decided to stop translating my needs into her language. For a second I thought she might actually say thank you, not for the paper but for the boundary, because there was a flicker in her eyes that looked like relief. But then the old need to win returned like muscle memory, and she leaned in and asked if I understood how serious it would be if anyone got the idea that she had served something unsafe. And I said I understood entirely, and that is why I had posted information, not accusations, and that if she wanted safe, transparency was the safest thing we had left, and then I told her I had one more change to announce and that I was letting her hear it from me first, which was that I had created a new family group that included everyone and that I had already moved event planning there, and that the old chat would still exist for their quotes and coupons or whatever else they liked to send each other, but that invitations would no longer be born in private and presented as a gift to the chosen, and she sat back and stared in that way she does when she is trying to figure out whether fighting me will cost her more than agreeing to terms. I finished my coffee and stood up because I wanted the timing to be mine, and she said, in a voice that sounded almost small, that she needed to ask me something and she needed the truth. And I told her I had been serving the truth all afternoon and she could take as many helpings as she wanted, and she swallowed and asked, without blinking, what exactly I had put in that soup, and I smiled in the clean, tired way you do when a test has already been graded, and I told her that I had put in exactly what she put into that trip, nothing she could taste at first, and everything she could not ignore later. And as I reached for my bag, my phone buzzed with a new message from Emily that started with my name and then paused like she was typing and deleting and typing again. And before I could open it, Mom said she was not asking for a metaphor. She wanted to know whether she should be worried about anyone finding something. And I looked at her for a long moment and then at the envelope on the table and said she should be worried about the new rules, not the old soup, because one of those things is permanent, and one of them was never the point. And she exhaled like someone stepping into cold water and asked, with no softness left at all, whether I was finished changing the family or if there was more, and I told her there was one last piece, and that she would hear it at dinner when everyone else did. I hosted the dinner I had agreed to host, not because I suddenly wanted to perform at the center of a room that has so often worked hard to act like I was scenery, but because I wanted the last move to be made with my hands steady and my voice clear and the rules printed in a way that could not be rewritten later with a sigh and a memory that conveniently forgot what was inconvenient. So I cooked the mild soup myself with ingredients so basic they could have been read out loud at a kindergarten class. I labeled the pot with a neat card that said gentle. I set out plain bread and safe sides, and a small stack of the spa aftercare printouts tucked at the end of the table where people tend to linger with their plates when they want to see without being seen. And I built the evening to look exactly like what it was, a family dinner that quietly installed a new operating system while the old one was still pretending it had a vote. People arrived with that combination of curiosity and defensiveness that shows up when a thread has been busy, and there were too many hugs and too many reassurances, and the usual loud jokes from the uncle who treats volume like intelligence. And I let the noise wash past me without grabbing any of it, because this time I was not trying to tune the mood, I was anchoring the structure, which is less dramatic but far more effective when what you want is a house that does not collapse the first time someone decides their comfort is the only room that matters. Mom came in carrying a cake like a white flag, Emily behind her with her face clean and calm, and a smile that tried to land somewhere neutral and kept slipping toward apology. And when we were all seated and the plates were filled and the topic had wandered through sports and school and a cousin's new job that he described the way people describe a lottery ticket they're afraid to scratch, I tapped my glass once, not hard, and said that I wanted to make a quick toast and then let everyone eat in peace, and the room quieted in that cooperative way families do when they believe they are about to witness a hallmark moment, and I told them that the last few weeks had been a loop none of us enjoyed, that I was finished with vague invitations and surprise exclusions, and the part where the word family gets used like a gift bag you can fill with whoever you want that day, and that I had created a simple system that would make the kind of fairness we claim to value not just a wish but a default, and I gestured toward a small stack of envelopes by the salt and told them each one had a card with a barcode that connected to a shared calendar and group, and that any event labeled family would live there with the guest list visible, the costs visible, and the host duties rotating in alphabetical order, and that if anyone wanted to plan something without a cousin or a sibling or me, they were free to do it and post all the photos their hearts could hold, but they would call it what it was, private, and they would keep it out of the family thread. There was a wave of polite amusement because barcodes at dinner felt like a punchline until it did not, and then there was the productive silence that follows when people are counting the ways this changes their favorite shortcuts. And before Mom could organize her face into whatever expression she had prepared, I added that I would handle the first 2 months of rotation so no one felt ambushed by the logistics, and that all anyone had to do tonight was scan, enjoy, and leave with the understanding that the calendar was the only place future plans were allowed to live if we wanted to keep calling them family plans. And I said it all the way you say instructions for a board game you did not invent but have finally read, slow and without apology. Because the kindest thing you can do for people who rely on fog is turn on the light and then step back. Emily lifted her glass and asked if she could say something, and the room turned toward her, and she said that she had been careless with the spa aftercare and with the way she had handled the trip, and that she did not want to be the reason our get-togethers felt like a test of who mattered more. And she looked at me with a directness she rarely chooses and said that she knew she had been treated like the fragile one for too long, and that she had let it make her lazy, and she was sorry. And while I am not a collector of apologies anymore, I am also not immune to the relief that comes when someone stops pretending they do not see what you have named. So I nodded and told her thank you, and I meant it without giving back an inch of ground. Mom did not toast. Of course she did not. She asked a practical question that had shame hiding under it, wanting to know whether the calendar would track costs and who paid and whether that was necessary. And I smiled in a way that made the answer clear before I said it, telling her that the calendar would show shared expenses when they were relevant, and that it was not about money so much as it was about the habit of pretending that some gestures are for the group when they are actually for one person, and that transparency does not humiliate decent people, it embarrasses selfish choices, which, if you are not planning on making them, should feel like a non-issue. And a cousin clapped once without meaning to, which made a few others laugh in the friendly way that breaks tension while agreeing with the point. I kept everything measured because I wanted the room to cooperate out of self-respect rather than fear, and once the envelopes were opened and the little scans had beeped and the calendar had populated with a handful of dates and names that felt like accountability wearing a friendly shirt, I sat down and ate the soup I had made and watched Emily eat it too without any performance. And I watched Mom take a bite and keep searching my face for a confession that did not exist, and I gave her what she had never given me in moments like this, the comfort of a steady tone that does not gloat, just holds. When the plates were mostly clear and the noise had returned to its ordinary level, I stood one more time, not for drama but for completion, and I said there was one last housekeeping item and that it would be quick, and I reached under my chair for a small, clear box filled with simple laminated cards the size of a recipe card, each one printed with 2 short rules that I read out loud without flourish. First, call it family only if everyone is invited. Second, if you break rule 1, do not bring it to the family thread. And I handed the box to my aunt, the town crier, because I wanted the messenger to be someone who enjoys repeating things, and I said that I was done arguing feelings and would only accept logistics, and that if anyone needed to know why I was being this precise, they could remember that soup is easier to digest when you know exactly what is in it, and I let the line sit without pushing it into a metaphor, because it did not need my help to land where it needed to land. Mom asked, in a low voice that only our side of the table could hear, whether I was ever going to tell her what I had done that night, and I turned to her and said that I had done what she taught me to do. I had used what was on the table. And if what was on the table was a peace offering that ignored the wound it was supposed to heal, then I had simply passed it to the person it was always meant for, and I had let the room draw its own conclusions, which, to my mind, was the most honest move I have ever made in a house that prefers polite fictions. People started leaving in clusters the way families do when they are pretending they decided on their own to go at the same time, and there were hugs and promises and a few quiet thank yous that sounded like relief. And when the door finally shut and the kitchen was just a table again, Mom stayed behind with Emily, and the 3 of us stood there for a second that did not know what it wanted to be. And I broke it by picking up the stack of leftover envelopes and slipping one into Mom's hand, telling her that the calendar invite for a long weekend in early spring was already in there, and that it included everyone, and that I had booked a house big enough for no one to feel like a guest in their own family. And I said that I understood if she needed time to adjust to new habits and that I was not asking her to love it, just to follow it, because I was done negotiating the basics. And then I picked up a piece of bread, took a slow bite that tasted like certainty rather than a line in a story, and I watched her nod once, not happily and not in defeat, but in the way people nod when they realize the game they invented does not end just because someone else learned to play it better. And Emily squeezed my arm on her way out and said she would see me at the planning call, and I said I would send the agenda like a nerd, and she laughed for real. And when the door closed behind them, I sat down in the chair that had always felt temporary and let it feel like mine.